we could get was beautiful, this beautiful coated wire that was a blue, a pink, and a yellow. It's really exquisite colors. So we were sitting, all three of us, four of us were sitting at the table, and so I said, John, can you light this light bulb? That's kind of the typical thing. That comes from Lawrence Hall of Science 40 years ago. I mean, it's really old. And so he's working at trying to do that, but the part of the problem that it was coated, and so we had to, he had to scrape some of the coating off the wire. And Michael, the older girl, was sitting across, and so she said, Grandma, can I have some of that wire? And I said, well, honey, it's not my wire, it's John's wire. You have to ask him. Which I knew he was going to say yes. So she asked, he said yes, and so she cut off. I mean, we had big spools. I mean, they were this long and this big around. We had plenty of wire. So she cut off, I don't know, maybe a couple of feet worth. And the next thing I'm looking at, she has created this flower out of this wire. John's trying to light the light bulb. Rain's a little maniac walking around. She is just a pistol. So she was trying to light the light bulb, and I wasn't paying a lot of attention to her. I was trying to give John my attention. And so she did. And so the next thing I know, she ran around and she went to the tub, and there was a 9-volt battery in there. She took her wire and she took her bulb and put it together. Grandma, look, I can make it shine brighter. And that's what you want kids to do. You want them to learn themselves rather than me saying, well, now if you do this and you do that and you do this other, guess what's going to happen? Your light bulb's going to come on. The idea of students doing it themselves for science is the concrete. That is different, as I said, in math. So in the pictorial then, that would be viewing the screen, the print, animation, or the simulations. And this is a typical, one that we see. In math, they are going to use those manipulatives to understand it, and then they're going to draw their understanding of it. And I actually have a bunch of posters that we had from our professional development that we did that you could see. I'll see if I can bring one out for you to demonstrate their understanding of the math concept. So abstract then would be the next one, and we typically say words are abstract and numbers are abstract. That's why you don't start with vocabulary words. It's abstract, it's not concrete. Do they get to that? Well, they get to ones that they need to. They don't need to know every word. And in fact, our faculty has said for years, if we just had high school graduates who knew how to study, who knew, how did I say it? We don't need high school graduates who know vocabulary words. We need high school graduates who know how to study and who know how to work. And what did we particularly focus on in school? Vocabulary, because of STAR.
And regurgitating.
Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about words, we're talking about in this concrete pictorial abstract sequence, we're going to get there, we're going to name the concept after the students understand the concept. The numbers and formulas are used after the student understands the concept. So the abstract is pretty much the same in math and science in that way. Okay, known to the unknown. So I'm going to come back to you on this, Daniel. So it's not the adults known, and in fact you are going to complete what's called the research to guide. And the part of what you're going to do, it's not your lesson plan. It's the research you do to prepare your lesson plan. And part of what I put in there, but it was down a couple of pages, was what is the students known at examples and what are the adult examples. And that's what you need to know, though, at the beginning when you're planning. And so now in that research to guide, I have moved those 2 blocks up for you to complete up at the very beginning, almost after the teach. I mean, it's right there on the front page, it's the top half of the page. So it's not the adults or the teachers known. And oftentimes in standards you'll hear real world examples. Okay, well, not ours, theirs. Now, I'm old and it's hard for me to know what an 11-year-old's examples are if I don't, get to know their lives. So the idea of my examples, how I understand it, I still need to write that down, but it's not what they learn first. So you have the students, not the adults. And Daniel, here's what you were talking about here. So they're known as that prior knowledge, which is what we use a lot. We don't use the terms the known to the unknown, but that's what it's talking about when we're talking about prior knowledge building on. So the prior knowledge should be found in the prior teaks. That's not always true, but theoretically it is. It would be everyday examples that the kids, their lives are built on. And when you have 25 or 30 kids, you're going to have a wide range of examples. And that's why when I think I've mentioned to you about having an introductory paper that they complete, you know, to introduce themselves.
Oh, yeah.
So I had a full page that was single spaced, and they would put, you know, what they like to do for fun, what movies they like to watch, what TV shows, what games, you know, everything I could think of. I put that in there so that I could figure out what their life was, because even as a young adult, you know, it had been a while since I had been there.
It's not that in block.
Pardon?
They told us that about that in block.
Uh-huh.
You have to put stuff. You have to learn about them as a person, but also as a learner, so you can apply all that stuff.
Right. And then also their common experiences. If you know in the previous grade that they had concretely demonstrated their understanding of the molecules and the bases of matter, if you knew that for sure, then you could assume that was a common experience. But that's not generally true in most cases. That's why we have to give a lot of common, concrete experiences to students. We cannot assume that just because they were in the previous grade level, and this is what you would do if you were teaching that grade level. And that also means that you talk to other teachers a lot, and you ask them, did y'all have, did they do this lab or that lab or whatever? So objects, ideas that are understood by students. Gosh, it's probably been about 10 years ago. I had a student from, I think he was from Iran, somewhere in there, somewhere in the Middle East like that. And he, I don't remember which lesson it was, 2E or 3E or 5E. Anyway, one of those lessons, he had this cartoon up on the screen. And all of us are sitting there going, and he said, "Don't you see? Don't you see?" And to him it was hilarious. I said, that is such a great example, because now we understand what students experience when we think that they understand something that we understand. Because we had no clue. I mean, there was no way we could see any kind of humor in that cartoon, but he thought it was hilarious. And for his culture, it was.
Was it like a visual comic, or was it have words that you couldn't read?
No, it was just like a single comic strip panel.
Okay.
Yeah. Not even a panel, I mean, just a single one.
Yeah.
And so, this is what you get to know your kids with. It might be an example that happened at a ball game yesterday, and you went to the ball game, and you can bring it back into the classroom. So as many of the common experiences that you can find out about the kids is going to help you bring that back into the classroom. And ask kids. Ask them, just like I did with you, what are examples that you think is this or that? Because you're going to name examples that are different from me, and each one of you is going to name examples different from each other. Also, if you can use that immediate environment, like the schoolyard, local sites like your classroom, so that every student has that common experience. Nobody is deficit, no matter what language their native language is, or where they were born, or anything else. They are all having that common experience. They're more likely to be able to have that foundation that you can build on. Okay, so you also want to think about using familiar objects. The problem page with having a single major, which is what you have, is that you know a lot, and you think the platypus, for example, is really interesting, whereas dogs are not that quite interesting. But we can't go with what we think is interesting. We're going to go with what's familiar. So if you're talking about some concept or characteristic or whether, start with the known to the kid. You start with the dog, you don't start with the platypus or what have you. If you're teaching about plants, bring in real plants that are common to the area. That's why that landscape for learning, if a school does that, you are going to have a great resource to bring in, or better yet, go out and collect and have the students bring it in. The prior teaks are supposed to be one that you could build on. That's not always true, as we know. But for example, we have a problem in that there are a lot, especially the high school students, are just have too many in there. They have more than is actually needed. It's not a freshman biology course, it's a freshman high school course. For example, in 612B, this would be 6th grade, they also have some redundancy, so you'll see prokaryote or eukaryote in there. And then if you go to biology, they've got the same thing. So one of the questions you want to think about when you're adding to the teaks, which is what we do when we create instruction around, is what does a graduating high school senior need? Not a science major, not an engineering major, but what does the average person who's going to get a certification in some mechanical field, mechanics or whatever. What do they need to know? What do they need to know about making medical decisions? What do they need to know about making personal decisions? So think about it on a really practical basis. That's when I took you to the Wildflower Center, that was kind of the basis that I was thinking about. I don't care for you to be botanists. We don't need everybody to be botanists. I'd like for you to understand the patterns in nature more and have some appreciation of that, because ultimately you're going to vote, you're going to make decisions about things, and so that foundation is more important than memorizing a bunch of vocabulary. So the teaks have more than one concept. This again is a 6th grade, 6.5C. Identify the formation of a new substance by using evidence of a possible chemical change, such as production of a gas, change in temperature, production of a precipitate, or a permanent change in color. Now, in the parentheses there, that's not in the teaks. It should be. It has to be a permanent change in color. So you're going to have to bring that one teaks into multiple lessons. You should not try to teach all of that in one lesson. It's too much. And then we talk about the third one concept or skill per lesson. So that goes back to that scaffolding there, so that they will learn it in incremental units. It's better to have 3 lessons in one period than to try to teach 3 concepts in one lesson. Students are more likely to understand all 3 if you do. You need multiple lessons when you're trying to teach this one skill or concept. They need to understand the difference between direct and indirect evidence. There are a lot of things that we do with indirect evidence. We use them to make predictions, to make inferences. So if you use indirect evidence at the middle school to predict if a new substance is produced due to a lack of sophisticated equipment, we do that. What's the evidence that a new substance has been created? Remember? Gas could be produced, a change in temperature, a precipitate formed, or a permanent color change. Those are evidences indirectly, not direct evidence, because you don't have a gas chromatograph or whatever it is to determine what that new substance is, but you are looking for indirect evidence. And that's what your students are looking for. Because oftentimes what we deal everyday life with is indirect evidence, and we have to make inferences. So the idea of one concept per lesson means that we're going to stay on that one concept in that lesson. And I like to use the analogy of a plumb line. How many of you know what a plumb line is? I'm surprised you don't, because in physics. Never heard it said?
What is a plumb line?
I'm going to tell you.
I might know a different name.
Yeah. Okay, so a plumb line is used by people who are laying bricks. Okay, so bricklayers use it to line things up straight. This is a plumb line right here. You can't see it very well. It's got a wave here, and this is a exercise physiologist doing some kind of measurement of the bend of the knee as the patient cycles around. So that's a plumb line. So how far off the plumb line that angle is how much the knee bends, right? There is a plumb line here that's used in other construction. They use it a lot in construction. Now, we oftentimes will see a measure with a bubble in it to see if it's level, but that's not you couldn't use that to measure that. So there are different ways, different instruments that can do the same thing, but what you want to do is you want to use the idea of a plumb line, that's your anchor, you know, where your concept is, and stay focused on that learning objective. Don't be drifting off to things that are interesting to you but are not necessarily interesting, or the students need to know. There are things they do need to know. So the idea of a plumb line is old. This is from the Old Testament here. It mentions a plumb line in the Old Testament book of Amos. And the idea is that the plumb line keeps you focused, keeps things straight. It's this ancient measure that I mentioned here. Okay, so let's look at some of the teaks. Now, how much experience have you had looking at the teaks?
I've had a lot of experience.
A lot of experience. Yeah. And which science level did you look at? What grade level?
Mostly 6 through 8.
Okay, but within that, which did you? Because your certificate is 4-8, but you look primarily at middle school, 6-8. So, can you name some topics that you particularly focused on?
I mean, so it was depending on what lesson we were planning, and so there was a lot of earth science that I looked at. What is that, 8th grade?
Well, there's earth science in all 3 grades.
Okay.
It's actually your middle school and elementary, K-8s are integrated. It's not until you get to high school that you start seeing this single focus. But even, they're not integrated. I mean, look at biology. Look at all the chemistry that's in biology.
And physics.
Let's see, I focused mainly on some earth science, depending on, like, I planned the lesson over erosion and deposition.
Is that you were in Dr. Westerland's class?
Yes, I took some of that from in
And that's
there.
good.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, if you can, I think it's better to rework a lesson than do another new lesson for students to learn how to really improve it. Daniel?
There was a science lab development and practice class I took with Dr. Luxford, and one of those was that we had to look at the
That's in
chemistry,
chemistry.
middle of the chemistry teaks, and adapt a lesson from there. So
Create a lesson based on those teaks.
and she wanted it to be based on guided inquiry as opposed to direct teaching. So mine was
Okay, we're gonna come back to guided inquiry later, but go on.
I'm trying to remember. It was about, I framed it as if, you're a minor and you're having to separate some metal from another substance, and they had to use given substances to figure out how to do that, how to physically separate it and then chemically separate it.
Okay.
And it talked about redox reactions as well. So that was covering specific.
Okay, so you had some experience with some of the high school chemistry teaks, which are actually not too different from the middle school ones.
Yeah.
Some of them, yeah. All right, well, this is just one in biology. And what I tried to do with these different colors is you can see here's one concept, here's another one, 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 here's one, here's another one. How many is that? About 6 or something? All in one teach. If you try to teach all of these concepts in one lesson, those kids they're just gonna give up. It's too much. I can't do this. And that's what we do to a lot of kids. And they think that it's their fault. And it's not their fault, it's our fault, because we did not plan that lesson, that series, that unit, or whatever you wanna call that series of lessons, where they actually learn those concepts. Now, of course, some of this, you can assume, partially assume that they know, because where do they learn about cells? This is biology. Where do they learn about cells?
Prior.
6th grade, 7th.
In middle school, yeah. So they know a little bit about cells from middle school. You don't know how much though unless you do some kind of pre-testing on them. So some of this you can you know they at least may know some of the names. They may have some kind of vague understanding, but you should not assume that they really have that deep conceptual understanding that you would hope. So to realize that the TEKS have a lot of concepts within one sentence there, and that means that you're going to have a lot of different lessons with it. So you always want to stay on the topic. When you start to plan your lesson, you are going to have that concept right in front of you. You are never going to let it out of your sight, because if you do, you're going to go, eh. I get off task, or I get off of the pathway if I don't have that learning objective right in front of me. So everything I'm thinking about, does it teach this? Does it teach this? Does this teach this? Does this teach? Every activity, everything I do has to stay on that's your plumb line, is that learning objective there. So you're going to select something, like homeostasis, for example, and then you're going to constantly ask yourself, does my lesson teaching this concepts, teaching the concept or the TEKS I have intended for it to teach, for the students to learn? Does it do this? Now, a direct instructional model or a direct teach, either way, doesn't matter what you call it, you can use a direct instructional model. In fact, you should use a direct instructional model to teach a skill or a process. And oftentimes within an inquiry, or 5E or 6E or 7E, whatever E it is, there's a process or a skill that you're going to have to teach. Oftentimes it's a chart. You'll have data charts in there. And so you have to teach students how to complete that data chart using a direct teach or direct instructional model.
And it's just assuming that using like a guided inquiry or some other model would just be less effective than just telling them you have to do it this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's what most people think it's either or, either direct teach instruction or inquiry, and it's not either or. Because if you've got kids completing a chart, data chart with some kind of investigation there that you've got them conducting, they have to know how to complete that chart. Or a chart, at some point you hope they can get to the point where they can complete them on their own with that kind of instruction. If there's a piece of equipment that they don't know how to use in this lab, then at some point, when it's just in time, that's when you're going to teach them how to use it. Y'all know what just-in-time concept is?
You explained it
You
to
told
us
us,
at the
yeah.
beginning.
Okay, yeah.
Give them the
Yeah.
information when they need it.
Yes, only when they need it. So you're not going to teach them how to use a microscope the first week and then 8 weeks later have them use it. You're going to do it whenever they need it. Now, the best way to understand the TEKS is to look at our standards. This is what we've already mentioned before. So you're going to look at all of the standards in that research to guide. You're going to look for the cognitive appropriateness, because some of those TEKS are not cognitively appropriate. They don't have the prerequisite math skill or experience, or it's too abstract. It should not be at that grade level. In fact, if you look at the standards, they pretty much say that the idea of teaching balancing equations, or even seeing if an equation is balanced, which is an 8th grade TEK, should not even be touched until high school. And I know chemistry teachers tell me they hate it, because those high school kids come into chemistry and they don't understand the chemistry that the middle school teacher was trying to teach them, because it was in the TEKS. I mean, it's not always the teacher's fault. And they have to reteach, and it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. It's hard to reteach. It's hard for us who really want to wipe out that old bad thinking and learn a better way of thinking.
And why haven't the TEKS been reformed to fix that?
Well, let's wait till we get to that, because that's a good question, and there's some answers, not necessarily a good answer, but there are answers for it. In the Benchmarks for Science Literacy, the BSL, there's a whole chapter on misconceptions, as you know, because you did that chart, which we had the conversation in last class. The other misconceptions are kind of scattered throughout the other standards, not in one chapter like the BSL. But the other thing that you can use the web for, which is one of the few things, is that you can go to the web and identify misconceptions. You'll also think about misconceptions that you hear kids, when you're asking kids questions or for discussions or reading what they've written, you can identify what misconceptions that they also have. And there are some instruments that I'll show you later, that's another way to identify misconceptions. So, if we're talking about best practices, we want to certainly use the research-based ones to plan and evaluate. And if students are not learning, you have to go back to the basics. What am I not doing? What does this lesson not have in it? And remember, these best practices are guidelines, they're not rules. There seems to be some exceptions every once in a while. And don't think a lesson is a period. It could be 15 minutes, it could be 2 days. And Megan, we don't have that BSCS table of contents here. We need that because what the BSCS table of contents does, the BSCS are the originators of the 5E, Biological Sciences Curriculum Study. And their table of contents they've got for one of their books shows it's not engage, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate. It's not that. It's an all bunch of mixture. And so that's what I said, these are guidelines, they're not rules. It's not a 5E, it's only a 5E. And it should not be done incorrectly. I went to see a student teacher actually in Austin School District, and this, you always talk with the cooperating teacher first, and she told me that she used a 5E. Well, I'm always leery when somebody tells me they use a 5E, because there's too many times it's not used correctly. And I said, okay, could you give me an example how you do that? She said, yes, on Monday we do the engage, and they define vocabulary words.
That's not engaging.
That is nowhere close to a 5E. And she told me she had gotten that training at the service center in Austin, and I talked to the service center woman about it, and I said, this teacher's saying she got the training from your service center, and this is what she told me. I mean, you need feedback when you hear things that are not good for kids. And the service center, is gonna make sure that doesn't happen with future trainings, and maybe going back and do some work. And just identify it. That is not correct. You don't use vocabulary first in any kind of inquiry. Okay, the 3 principles for effective STEM lesson planning then: concrete pictorial to abstract, students known to the unknown, and 1 concept skill per lesson. This is an essay question on every test you will have, every exam. I will give you a list of these, and it will have that on there, and it will be on every exam. There will be no doubt about what your essay questions are going to be.
So you'll ask, what are the 3 principles of effective STEM lesson design?
I will.
Let's list those.
And I'll also give examples or something like that. Okay. 1 second. Go back.
No, I have a picture.
Okay, you'll send it?
We're going to talk about it again. You're going to get a piece of paper that has this on there.
Okay.
You don't need to worry. I mean, you're going to know exactly what's going to be on your test. Okay. And then there are some videos. Did y'all see those online? Some of those videos at the teaching channel? Pardon?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make sure again if that one is working before we go. All right. So let's take a lap. It's past time. So take a lap. And I was reading some research that said you should also go up and down the stairs. So go up and down the stairs. Huh?
Let's take some stairs.
Oh, wait a minute. Check the team. You got to turn the camera off.
Daniel, I can't see it. Which one was it? The red one?
I can't tell you.